Hey, what's up, y'all? My name is Dennis Heil, and I am diagnosed with type 2 bipolar disorder with severe depression and high-functioning autism. I've been living with bipolar disorder for over 30 years, 15 of which I spent undiagnosed. In 2009, I experienced a depressive psychotic break that led to my diagnosis of type 2 bipolar disorder. I would be diagnosed with autism a few years later. In my podcast, Bluntly Bipolar, I'm going to share with you my experiences and the hard lessons I've learned trying to find some peace and happiness in my life. I hope that by sharing my experiences, others can avoid learning these lessons the hard way. I'm not a mental health professional. All I am is a mental patient with a microphone. Listener discretion is advised. Anger played a pivotal role in feeding my bipolar disorder and depression, as well as complicating social and emotional matters through my high-functioning autism. In the mini-series prefixed on anger, I will be exploring the role anger played in my mental unwellness and how it was used as a weapon to manipulate me as a straight white man from a blue-collar working-class background. This is episode 11, on anger, unraveling the myth of anger as strength. There was a moment in my life when I realized I only had two options left. I could either seek help or kill myself. But to explain how I arrived at that moment, I need to talk about anger. Anger feels like strength when that's how you survived. I was never an outwardly raging person most of the time. Instead, in the times I was not empty and depressed, I would have a low boiling anger that simmered beneath the surface. And I can attribute a significant part of my recovery from bipolar disorder to that anger, and especially to spite. For me, and many people like me, anger isn't just an emotion. It's a tool that we use to stay alive and to thrive. We use it in place of passion and inspiration because it provides energy in situations where you might be struggling. Yes, I have my suicide attempts. However, anger and spite talked me off of the ledge more than once. I slipped into depression early on and started bipolar cycling when I was about 13. And my anger didn't relent until I was in my mid-30s, after a few years of therapy and recultivating my own emotional landscape. I can't attribute my anger to any one single thing. It was a mix of mental illness, social conditioning, and my perception of the world. I never viewed it as much of a problem. The area I grew up in and the places I found myself as an adult never saw anger as a problem. Anger was strength. It was masculine. It also kept people away. And because I'm a 6'4" man, a little bit of anger would push most people away. That suited me fine, especially with my paranoia and defensiveness. It was fine because I didn't want to be around people. I couldn't project weakness and vulnerability. That's not masculine. That will get you taken advantage of. And life reinforced that for me. I was 19 years old when I walked to a corner store to get a few things for my ex's kids. On the way out, I got hit in the head from behind, groceries stolen and my pockets emptied while everything was fuzzy. I went home and I was freaking out. I explained what happened to my girlfriend at the time, and she told me something that stuck with me ever since. Quit acting like an F slur. Everyone's going to see you as weak and a target if you don't. And the look of disgust on her face told me everything I needed to know. My life had been fairly sheltered from the ugliest sides of life up to that point, but it was a distinct wake-up call. In that environment, she was right. I wasn't in an environment where vulnerability was acceptable. I was living in the kind of neighborhood where vulnerability makes you a target. I just didn't understand how to carry myself in that environment, and she did. The problem is that I didn't leave those habits and beliefs behind when I left that environment. I still carried many of those same habits and mannerisms, and they become destructive in healthier situations. And much of that was rooted in anger and a strong desire to avoid ever being caught in that kind of situation again. It was gasoline on the fires of my bipolar disorder, fueling greater instability. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I realized I still looked over my shoulder every time I left a public building. Anger was my primary defensive mechanism, and it worked well. Unfortunately, simmering all the time would eventually lead to boiling over. There were too many times my anger emerged at the wrong time. It was made worse with bipolar and wellness. It sprinkled in erratic thinking, more paranoia that came and went with hypomania, and too much impulsiveness. And frankly, it's embarrassing. I used to do things like rage at video games because just a small amount of frustration would turn the heat up in my brain, causing me to boil over. It would feel like nothing is going right, and this minor inconvenience that means nothing is just tossing a gallon of gasoline on my smoldering brain. Your life was burning all around you, and all you want to do is sit down and escape into a fictional world for a little while. But no, you keep making minor mistakes, fucking things up, and it's enraging because you can't even get this right. No, whoa, wait. I mean, that guy is clearly hacking, my connection's laggy, and this controller isn't working right. I remember one time years ago, I yelled at a random guy for going out of his way to help me. I misunderstood what he said, and instead of gratitude, I was angry at myself for being confused, and I took it out on him by screaming at him. It was such a terrible and embarrassing behavior on my part, but I was unstable. I couldn't realize I was doing anything wrong, and I couldn't stop myself. Bipolar and wellness has a lovely symptom of pressured speech. Your thoughts just kind of pour out of your mouth before you realize what you've said. That filter in your brain that says, hey, don't say that out loud, it just disappears. My autism fueled my anger too. I had a hard time getting general socialization right. I eventually got tired of messing up, so I used anger to keep people away. Being standoffish or snippy meant most people would just leave me alone. That way I wouldn't have to deal with being reminded of my shortcomings. It was just easier that way. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I could go on all day about what anger cost me. Cost me relationships. Cost me opportunities. It cost me peace. It cost me self-respect. It cost me self-control. And it made me an easy target for people who wanted to exploit it. I talk about my diagnosis more in depth in episode 1, but the reason that I finally sought help was because of a psychotic break in a mixed cycle. I had so much rage, and the psychosis forced me to believe that there were no other options than to project my rage outward. After all, if I can't be happy, why should anyone else? It felt like the only path that was left for me, like it was a foregone conclusion. It was only because of a random set of circumstances that I crashed out of that cycle and anchored back into reality when I did. When that happened, I was horrified with what my brain came up with. And when that episode ended, I knew something had to change. I could either get help or I could kill myself before I totally lost control. And I opted to try for help first. That started my journey with talk therapy and medication. Thanks to my therapist, I started having realizations about myself pretty quickly. The first realization for me was learning more about the complex nature of diagnosis. I recall during my screening that he asked if I experienced any irritability, and I said no. To me, as a random dude, irritability says mild annoyance. I didn't think I experienced irritability because my brain would usually skip straight past mild annoyance into anger. There's nothing mild about it. But the context is different for a clinician who's evaluating potential symptoms. In that context, irritability is like the ground floor of a building. The floors of the structure above it are things like anger and rage, which may or may not lead to violence and aggression. And that's an important caveat because a majority of mentally ill people aren't a threat to anyone but themselves. Plus, to be considered a symptom, it has to be severe enough to negatively impact your ability to live your life. Like it screws up your relationships or opportunities, that sort of thing. I didn't realize that most of my life up to then had been defined by the symptom of irritability. Why? Well, have you ever had someone punch you in the same spot over and over? At first it hurts, then it just gets more painful. Then they come around the next day and slap the same spot, and it still hurts because the body hasn't had a chance to fix it yet. Long-term mental health issues are similar. My brain never had much of a chance to recover, so even a soft touch was agonizing. But how does that translate into actions? Well, consider walking down the street and someone barely brushes past you. That's nothing, and you could just go on with your day. But instead, the brush happens, and immediately you're yelling, "Yo, watch where the fuck you're going, asshole." No irritation, just rage. And many people celebrate that. They think it's strength, because even now, anger is the most socially acceptable emotion for men. It's the one people will actually make space for. So most people don't give a fuck if you're sad or afraid. They just see it as a vulnerability or a problem. Learning about toxic masculinity changed my perception. I know. I rolled my eyes when it was suggested to me in the past, but I didn't understand what toxic masculinity actually was. I only understood the propaganda designed to keep men like me angry. Toxic masculinity is just a way to identify masculine behaviors that are actively harming you or the people around you. That's it. That's all it actually is. But the propaganda defines it as all things masculine to make us feel like we're under attack. That stirs anger and the need to defend oneself, because who the fuck are you to judge me? So let me give you an example. Jeff is walking down the street and brushes past Mark. Mark's anger flares. He feels disrespected, so he turns around and punches Jeff. Jeff hits the ground. His head bounces off the concrete and he dies. Now, Jeff's dead. Mark gets headed to prison for involuntary manslaughter, and 2 families get destroyed over nothing. None of that was necessary, but we tend to lump standing up for yourself in with violence. Understanding toxic masculinity changed the context of several pieces of my puzzle. I like to think about myself, my mental health, and life as giant jigsaw puzzles. Everything I learn are handfuls of puzzle pieces. After I receive them, I then have to figure out if these pieces go to my puzzle or not. And if they do, where do they fit? After I learned that, I started looking at my life, society, and what was going on around me. Now I can't unsee the strings. Anger is an ideal emotion for manipulation. It spreads like a wildfire, and it feels amazing until it doesn't. Not only that, it shuts off critical thinking. Instead, you see everything through rage-colored glasses, and it makes you easier to manipulate. I decided that I had to get my anger under control because no one should have that power over me. I seem to inherit a defiance gene from my dad's side of the family. My initial reaction to someone telling me what I'm going to do or how I should do it is essentially, "Fuck you, I will burn this bridge while we're both standing on it just to spite you." That part of me hasn't disappeared. The difference now is that I don't impulsively light the match like I used to. To do that, I had to develop a healthy relationships with all of the emotions that made me uncomfortable, that I shut down, that I saw as vulnerability or weakness. I was swallowed in bipolar depression for so long that most of what I was experiencing was emptiness, suicidality, sadness, regret, spite, and anger. Depression smothers the positive emotions first and just keeps pushing down. When it's at its worst, I can't feel anything. I don't feel sad or angry. It just devours everything and leaves numbness behind. I often think of the nothing from the never-ending story as the perfect allegory for all you old people like me. We often interpret negative emotions as bad or wrong, and many people want to avoid them. But they're not. They're like your check engine light coming on. They're telling you that something is wrong and you need to do something about it. Putting a piece of electrical tape over it and ignoring it isn't the answer. Something's wrong, and it's going to get much worse if you don't address what caused the light. That's toxic positivity. Toxic positivity is just a rebranding of avoidance. And personally, I'm not keen on it. I never want to feel like I have to run for shelter when the storm clouds roll in on my life. I want to be able to stand in the rain until it passes. And ideally, I want to still be able to enjoy life and maintain a good attitude even while it's raining. Cognitive behavioral therapy helped that a lot. I found that it worked very well for me. I think because I'm on the autistic spectrum. I could logic my way out of certain emotions. For example, I may have felt bad about something, but when I examined the situation, I would realize I had no reason to feel bad about it. Then the emotion would just turn off, like flipping a switch. And I eventually found out that cognitive behavioral therapy heavily draws from the philosophy of Stoicism. And a big part of my success in therapy and recovery comes from Stoicism. There's a lot of power in the space between an action and a reaction, which is a central theme of that philosophy. Like many angry people, I just always interpreted my anger to be valid. I felt justified in throwing my anger at anyone or anything that made me angry. After all, I felt like that was their fault, so they deserved it. Not only is that an incredibly unhealthy way to move through the world, it's also a total surrender of the control of my emotional landscape. That realization hit me deep. After my psychotic break, I was confronted with an undeniable, uncomfortable truth. I had to wrestle with this idea that not only did my anger keep me safe for a long time, but it also made me vulnerable. Helpless, in fact, because there were too many times I could remember having no control over my thoughts because of it. The unhealthy habits and behaviors that allowed me to survive my life with undiagnosed mental illness do not serve me in recovery. They do not translate at all. They need to be addressed so I wouldn't self-sabotage in the future. My anger was essential in surviving my life up to that point, but once I started recovering, I realized that it couldn't be such a dominant feature of my emotions. After my psychotic break, I realized that something had to change. Now, as I close this out, I want to let you know what my goal for this On Anger miniseries is. As a blue-collar dude who grew up in a conservative area with a challenging life, I've come to resent the way my anger was cultivated and weaponized. And yes, I am angry about that. However, my anger doesn't burn like an uncontrolled wildfire anymore. Instead, it burns more like a laser that I can point at things. I can turn it on and off when I need to. I can point it where I want it to be instead of where manipulators want to aim it. When I feel my anger spike, I stop and I think about why I'm feeling angry and who stands to gain from my anger. Even just a 10-second pause between action and reaction gave me so much more control over the outcome of my anger. And I know how some men will interpret that, because I used to believe that anger was strength too. But it's not. It's a vulnerability that propagandists and influencers exploit to steal your time, money, livelihood, and health. After my psychotic break, I realized that anger had kept me alive for a long time, but I needed to change. I thought anger made me strong, but it didn't. It made me predictable. It made me easier to control by anyone with gasoline to throw on my fires. Thank you for spending your time with me. Hit subscribe and share this with someone you think it might help. Please consider leaving an honest rating and review on your platform of choice. Have a good one.